Right, so far we've uploaded a relatively short series of meditations on the initial scope of Lam Rim. So there's 3 scopes corresponding to 3 different motivations for practicing Dharma, and the more realised you become as you progress through the stages of the path, the Lam Rim, the higher your motivation becomes. And we've completed all of the steps and the stages of the initial scope, and we're about to start the intermediate or middling scope, the wish to developing the wish to attain liberation from our own suffering. And to start off, we've been uploaded into the playlist first Lam Rim program, I think it's called. So to start off this middling scope, we've got a series of 10 special meditations, a mixture of some of the reading from the chapter on the 5 all accompanying mental factors in this book, How to Understand the Mind, and also some of my own writings to explain and to gain insights from an investigation and analysis of these 5 mental factors and the many different ways in which they manifest. So the first of 10 meditations I'm uploading tonight. So without further ado, shall start here. So starting with discrimination. The 5 all accompanying mental factors are so called because they accompany every primary mind. If just one of them were missing, the primary mind would not be able to cognize its object. So in fact, primary minds and mental factors is a teaching on dependent relationship. It's a teaching on the mind being dependent upon its parts. So try and isolate one part of the mind, and yet on a conventional level you can say it's the mind. It perceives, it cognizes its empty form like space, like this. On a conventional level, that's fair enough. But if you try to find the real mental factor independent of anything else, you cannot find it. If you try to find the primary mind independent of anything else, you cannot find it. Therefore, you cannot find the mind ultimately either, if you're doing an ultimate search. So it's a teaching on dependent relationship, which leads you to develop wisdom, realizing emptiness. Alright, so that was just a little introduction. Do your preparatory practices now, and then we'll start the contemplation. Definition of discrimination. The definition of discrimination is a mental factor that functions to apprehend the uncommon sign of an object. Every object has features that distinguish it from other objects and enable us to recognize it. The function of the mental factor discrimination is to apprehend these uncommon features. Brackets now, that means I've written the next bit. When our mind generates a delusion, for example, discrimination apprehends the uncommon sign of the object of delusion. Although in reality the objects of delusion, desirous attachment and anger and deluded doubt, do not exist, the mind of mistaken discrimination apprehends these objects to exist. Without mistaken discriminations, which are delusions rooted in self-grasping ignorance, we could not perform non-virtuous and unskillful actions. Function of discrimination. Again, this in brackets, I've written this bit myself. Mistaken discrimination functions to distinguish one person as friend, and we believe that we can derive happiness from this person, and another person as enemy, and we believe that we shall suffer from coming into contact with this person. Speech mark. This is my enemy, or speech mark. This is my friend, or the speech mark. This is why I am worthy and I should have what they have, like jealousy, or speech mark. That is not liked, or speech mark. Those people are not my friends. So these are examples of thoughts. These are the objects of mistaken discrimination. We also name and label things based on these delusions, by sound or by thought. From the book, defining characteristics of an object do not exist from the side of the object, but are merely imputed by the mind that imputes them. We can understand this by considering how different people view one object. For example, observing a particular person called John, one person might identify an enemy, while another identifies a friend. Brackets, 2 opinions, 2 labels, 1 person, end bracket. If the characteristics of an enemy and friend exist from the side of this person, there would be a contradiction here. But since these characteristics are merely imputed onto the person by different minds, there is a contradiction. Sorry, there is no contradiction. Typo. From his side, John does not have a fixed set of defining characteristics, waiting to be discovered by various minds. What he is depends solely upon how he is identified by the minds that apprehend him. We can choose how we discriminate objects. As Dharma practitioners, we should choose to discriminate only in constructive ways, in ways that are conducive to virtue. But since these characteristics are merely imputed onto the person by different minds, there is no contradiction. Right, brackets, I wrote this. Because of our unclear discriminations, we fail to learn the Dharma lessons of everyday life, and so we fail to maintain a peaceful mind, and we fail to make advances towards profound realisations. When we have clear discriminations, we easily learn the practices of Dharma, of Sutra and Tantra, and we make swift spiritual progress. Right. Divisions of discrimination. There are 3 ways of dividing discrimination. From the point of view of uncommon and dominant condition, there are 6 types of discrimination. 1. Mistaken discriminations associated with I consciousness. 2. Mistaken discriminations associated with ear consciousness. 3. Mistaken discriminations associated with nose consciousness. 4. Mistaken discriminations associated with tongue consciousness. 5. Mistaken discriminations associated with body consciousness. 6. Mistaken discriminations associated with mental consciousness. Alright, so since we've got 6 consciousnesses, that means we've got 6 different discriminations at all times. We've got non-conceptual sense consciousnesses and discriminations, and we've got conceptual, mental consciousness and discrimination. And they always have an object, even if it's kind of a neutral object. Our mind also depends on what we pay attention to. But all these come together to form our experience. Excuse me. If any of the 6 consciousnesses lacked mistaken discrimination, it would not be able to generate delusions apprehending non-existent objects. Mistaken discrimination associated with I consciousness is mistaken I awareness. I consciousness with mental factors is an I awareness. Use the word awareness when you talk about the primary mind plus mental factors. So you're describing a primary mind, basically, because they're not separate. The primary mind always goes along with its mental factors, always has mental factors. Those mental factors change through time, so it changes the quality of our experiences. Mistaken I awareness. All wrong awarenesses have mistaken discrimination. This is from the book. And all unskillful actions of body, speech and mind result from mistaken discrimination. We act destructively because our mind is based upon mistaken discrimination. Anger, for example, has a discrimination of its object as inherently unpleasant, while attachment has a discrimination of its object as inherently attractive. In both cases, the discrimination is mistaken because attractiveness and unattractiveness depend upon the mind and do not exist from the side of the object. If the mental factor discrimination is mistaken, the primary mind and all the other mental factors that it accompanies are wrong awarenesses. It is precisely because self-grasping and wrong views of mistaken discrimination that they apprehend wrong objects. I think it's talking about all 6, not just mental discrimination, but all 6 consciousnesses, all the wrong awarenesses. There are many causes of mistaken discriminations, such as previous imprints, familiarity, listening to wrong teachings or advice, and contemplating wrong reasons. All have the seeds of mistaken discriminations, but whether or not they ripen and influence our life depends to a large extent upon our lifestyle. If we lead a negative or non-virtuous life, we will tend to develop wrong thoughts as a way of justifying our behaviour, but if we lead a positive or virtuous life, we will be much more likely to adopt correct thoughts. It's ripening the best crops. I want to weed out the negative things and weeds. Take out the stones and the weeds from our garden. We want to nurture the flowers and the shrubs. It's a good analogy for the mind. The imprints of ignorance cause mistaken discriminations that apprehend an inherently existent self, even though such a self does not exist. Moreover, because our familiarity with delusions, we discriminate some people as our friends, some people as our enemies, and some as strangers. But all these discriminations are mistaken discriminations, because in reality, all sentient beings are our mothers. There is another twofold division of discrimination: clear discriminations and unclear discriminations. Finally, in brackets, I've written this bit. We need clear and correct discriminations to help us avoid unskillful actions of body, speech and mind. things better. So, to conclude, last conclusion I've just written myself. We need clear and correct discriminations to help us avoid unskillful actions of body, speech and mind. We also need conscientiousness to keep our mind habituated to virtuous behaviour. Eventually, we will generate mindfulness and alertness on virtue. To practice correct view, meditation and action in all of our Dharma practices. So we can work towards abandoning the false view of the self that we think exists, and recognise the correct self that does exist as a mere name. And we can abandon the mistaken discriminations that thinks that living beings are our friends from which we derive our happiness, or our enemies or strangers. No, they are our mother living beings who have been our mothers in previous lives. Just lead a positive, virtuous lifestyle that gives rise to conscientiousness, mindfulness and alertness. We're going to prevent our mind from developing anger or attachment or jealousy or pride or deluded doubt or wrong view or deluded view. By revealing the existence of the objects of these delusions, do this with correct, unmistaken discriminations that we develop in Dharma practice. And we can recognize that the 6 discriminations of the 6 consciousnesses arise from their own continuums. The sense awarenesses, the mental awareness have their own causes, so we do not grasp the singular mind that does not exist. Clear, unmistaken discriminations result in peace and happiness, and unclear or mistaken discriminations result in negativity, delusions, and suffering. Whenever we have suffering, it's because we have conceived an object to exist from its own side. Okay, thank you, and good night. Oh. So I shall read something from the post text. The 16 wrong thoughts explained in the Lamrim teachings are listed on pages 177 to 178 are all based on mistaken discriminations. That's in the book, How to Understand the Mind. For example, the second of these, not wishing to take the essence of our precious human life, involves the mistaken discrimination that the only meaning of this life is worldly pleasure. Dharma practitioners should make prayers to be free from all these mistaken discriminations, because they severely hinder our attainment of the realisations of the stages of the path. Lamrim realisations are attained by eliminating these mistaken discriminations and developing the opposite, non-mistaken discriminations. Right, so it's also worth reading about why it's not a good idea to become too interested in the absorption of discrimination. Alright, good night.